Hi, I'm Teel.
And I'm Debbie.
And this is the Intentional Community Podcast.
I love talking to Desiree. Any excuse to talk to her is just great.
And she's the first guest that both of us know really well.
Yeah.
So that was really fun to be with her. And I feel like she brought us a little bit deeper than the previous episodes because she knows us better. And so that was great to talk about conflict and dive deeper into that theme, which comes up a lot when you're talking about community.
Sure
But we had a lot of good imagery that came up in that conversation. So I'm excited for you to hear it. So enjoy this episode where we talk to Desiree. So we intentionally had a few guests early that didn't really know much at all about Jesus people, so that they could be kind of what? So ask kind of entry-level questions, what are y'all doing? How does intentional community work? Obviously, you know a little bit more than that, which is good because you can take us a little deeper and we can talk about that. And so I'm glad you came, and I turn it to you to ask us any questions you have about intentional community to get us started.
Okay, so I got really excited about some of these questions, so I put them down on my little phone so I wouldn't forget.
That's great.
Because I put some thought into it. So I wanted to start kind of really generally and think about, so when I think about living in community, living in intentional community, I think, okay, well, first of all, we have to baseline admit that there's a difference between general coexistence and living purposefully together in community. So can you just start by speaking to what's the difference and how do you lean into that purposeful intention? That's not just I acknowledge that you and I live together and we walk this earth, but there's the purposefulness of that. What is that and how do you do that?
Yeah, well, At the top, I always want to say when I'm having this conversation, it's hard to talk about it without coming off as arrogant. Intentional community is it's hard to but there obviously we're doing a different thing.
Yeah.
And it's not better, but it's been better for me. I chose it because I wanted it.
Yeah.
But I think one way that I've been trying to describe it is. It's a little bit of a winding description, so stay with me.
Okay.
In a normal life, or an average person's life in the United States per se, because that's all I can really speak to, is that you go to your job and you go to school or you live your life. You might go to a certain coffee shop regularly, and you might have a doorman or a person that you see, a barista that you see a few times a week, and you might build a relationship with them over time and get to know their name, maybe even ask questions or about their family. And there might be certain people that you ride up the elevator with in your apartment that you live in, and you might kind of get to know them over time, or something might happen in your church that is a hard thing, and you kind of come together around it, and then that bonds you, or you go on a trip together, and it's all those little in between things that where you build community. You build community on your way up the elevator and on your way and getting your coffee, and you squeeze your time with your best friends into the weekends and into kind of the margins of your life, and spending time with your extended family and whoever you want to build community with, right? And I think that all those cool all those moments of building community with people that you run into or your best friends. For me, it was instead of squeezing that into the margins, I want to have that be the thing, have that be the center, and have everything else, my job and my everything, kind of all the structure of my life, serve that thing rather than the other way around. Provide for myself, and then after that, try to squeeze relationships into the margins. Let's turn it upside down, and I really want to be able to focus in on and center the relationships. And so I think that intentional community is just really just a structure and a system to allow that to happen more by sharing things, because then if you share cars, then you have to exchange keys to a person who keeps all the keys, and you might just today I jammed somebody because I forgot to tell them where I parked the car, and then they called me, and then I had to apologize. But that whole process was a excuse for me to like be vulnerable and like make a mistake and apologize, and they can forgive me. And so the more that you share, the more like reason you have to like build relationships and run into each other, for good, better, or for worse. And the less you share, the more freedom you have and preferences you have, but the less you're going to have those connections. And so I guess for me, intentional community is like the other thing I was describing of like you're out walking to work and you might get to know the doorman or whatever. That's unintentional community in a sense. Like it's kind of just like I've gotten to know Bob here because he works at the coffee shop that I go to, and I talk to him every once in a while, and that's kind of, it's incidental, but it's good. And so I guess I want to recognize that not only people that live in intentional community like value that. It's like we all, I think, as humans value that connection. Yeah. It's just that intentional community is like, let's harness that and like make that the thing, and do something different to build around that. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like that.
I was just talking to a fellow community member today about her husband comes from kind of small town-ish area in the United States, and talking about how there was like a crisis in that town, like a fire had happened or something, and how everyone just pitched in, right? Like the local restaurant donated food, and people just kind of rallied around, and like we know that, we see it around like natural disasters, or even during the pandemic. I got an email yesterday, and it's like, I want to take a moment to thank my quarantine. And it was just like I don't know, it was a news personality. And I thought, oh man, I have a whole house full of quarantine. But we see this kind of intentionality around those kinds of crises. And most people only get to experience it at those moments, right? Of this kind of intentionality of this people kind of rallying around. And I think, instead of waiting for some crisis to happen, like we're trying to build this team of like, not a team, it's more than a team and less than a team. I don't know, it's just different. Of this group of people who are called to...
Whatever we are.
Called to share our lives, and then when there is something to celebrate, or when there's a crisis, those are kind of like extra shining moments. I think in any community, but I think for us, it's just a reminder of like, oh, I have someone so close that will just step in to the gap. So, yeah.
Yeah, they're almost like more authentic manifestations, like those crisis moments or those, big joy moments are like natural manifestations of the community that already exists, rather than it being formed around those things happening. They come out kind of organically and naturally. I got so I'm a really visual person. So like, Teel, when you were talking about like these little moments of community, it kind of like the kind of image that I got was all these like kind of fragmented or like small but isolated communities. And so this like the intentional piece is uniting, bringing it all together. Like I like the word you used, the word harnessed, I think was the word you used to describe it, and it just gave me this picture of some unified thing rather than this kind of fragmented, isolated, siloed thing, which is really cool.
Yeah, it ties a thread through it all, and but also if you just know Bob the barista, at the coffee shop that you go to regularly, you don't really have to know. You don't have to deal with like. Generally, you probably don't have to deal with like Bob's worst like traits. It's probably you're getting a certain slice of who this person is, and you're probably, and you don't have to. It's pretty uncomplicated relationship, so you can kind of you like each other. Even if you're having a bad day, you can kind of put a smile on for Bob. You're only going to talk to him for like 15 seconds and maybe a couple minutes. And it's kind of nice.
old
It's like,
Bob.
well, Bob really likes me.
Yeah.
Of course he likes you. He doesn't know you yet.
Yeah,
you know,
right,
kind of
right,
like,
right.
and it's kind of
And
the
he
same
wants to
both
sell you
ways.
things, so.
And you give him a good tip, and you know, and that's it. It's a pretty simple
Right.
relationship, but it's still important. It's still good.
Yeah.
But so if you're living, the more you're sharing with Bob, if you're sharing vehicles and
Right.
and he trashes the car, if you're sharing childcare, like, and you parent your kids differently, or if you're sharing
Sure.
a house, you know, and food, then like it gets more and more complicated. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a high risk, high reward scenario. So it costs something, you know,
Yeah.
but that's what that's what I chose, you know, that's what I like about it.
Yeah. Say more about the cost. Like, say more about that, if you're willing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because I'm hearing a lot of, I'm hearing some of what the reward is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it can be easy, I think, to, you know, from the outside looking in, see maybe this sort of like utopian existence, like
Right.
how perfect it is that everyone lives together and they share things, but,
Yeah.
you know,
Anyone, who's
likely not that
right.
simple.
Anyone who's grown up in a family like knows that living with people is not
Yeah.
always easy, and sharing things with people who have different ideas of how clean that thing should be, or how, you know, punctual should be in returning it, or any of those kinds of things, knows that, like the more, like what Teel is saying, the more things you share, the more opportunity there is for conflict. And it's been many years since I have like really welcomed conflict as like a tool to get closer to people. But I don't think that's always how people view it. But I think it's not talked about enough I think it's more so than maybe when I was in school, but like ways to, you know, get through a conflict, ways to communicate and not hurt the person that you're in the conflict with. I mean, there's so many facets to any interpersonal communication, especially if it's difficult, that there's so many opportunities for pain. And, you know, after many years of painful relationships, sometimes it can be easy to shut off, or to be a little, you know, afraid of trying to make things right, but I have found that, the cost sometimes is just that, like, oh, I have to say this. I want things to be right. I don't want to stay in this conflict. I want to make things right, which is a funny cost, but it is a true cost of like, I want to say I'm sorry. I've said I'm sorry a lot, and probably should say it even more, but and just being known like all the time. I mean, you know, when you live with people 24/7, I mean, we have private spaces, but I mean, there's just a lot of overlap and a lot of, people seeing you maybe not at your best. So
the cost is vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best, that's the best way to describe it. And that, like, and the cost is the gift, though. Like, the vulnerability is also, they're one and the same. But like, I think that's a muscle, like, to be vulnerable and to apologize. Those are like muscles that are, if you don't use them, then it feels like very tiring and almost impossible if you know. And so I think living in community, you have to work out that muscle, and as you get in shape, then it actually turns into more of a gift. You start to feel the gift of it, because then it kind of liberates you. You're like, oh, I don't have to hold all this in, because that's just as painful or worse, right? To hold it in and not share it. But if you haven't used that muscle of sharing and being vulnerable, then it's very scary and alarming, and it's hard. And so I think there's a hump and then another hump, and it keeps going. But I watch myself and others like either get to that hump and run, you know, or freak out, or think like this community is terrible, or like I got to get out of here, or they get through it, and then they get to the other side of the hard part into the reward of that vulnerability, and like, oh, I lost my mind, and people still people saw it happen, and they still like me, and they're still want to live with me, and that's the reward of it. If you can get to the reward of it's really scary to be vulnerable, but people didn't leave me.
Right.
They still like me and love me. Then you're like, oh wow, and you feel the liberation of that, and it prepares you for the next probably bigger hump down the road. But so that is the cost, but it's also the gain. It's kind of woven together. I think about I've even more in the pandemic become kind of a wimp when it comes to choosing what movie I want to watch or show, that I can't take I don't want intense movies that are really sad or really violent or just have conflict in them. I just want to, I find myself just I'm going to watch Notting Hill. I know exactly what happens. There's very little conflict or suspense. I know what I'm gonna get, and I don't people have recommended that whatever show you should watch. Did you ever watch The Wire? You should go back and watch it. It's a great show. I'm I don't know. It sounds like I might have to embrace myself for some people dying or I don't know. It's 2020, 2021. Ain't nobody got time for that. So it's that same kind of thing. Do I want to? But you're a character in the movie, so you actually have to. It's do
you
I
have
really
to
want?
engage. It's not going away.
It's I just want to be in my room and just have my own TV and my own car and my own everything, so I don't have to engage with that, because it is scary and it takes a lot of work. And so I think that's how I would compare it to do you want to? But again, high risk, high reward. If you're willing to, you'll get a lot more out of a movie like Saving Private Ryan than you probably will out of Notting Hill, because it is engaging in some really real raw stuff. But the cost is
bracing myself for it. Yeah.
But the reward is also in it. Okay, that did something in my heart.
Right. The transformation value. Not to mention, I can imagine when you get to the other side of that hump and you experience being on the receiving end of that reward, how that has transformational value in you then extending that to the next person, right? I was on the receiving end of my worst day, and these people are still here, by what mystery? But how valuable that is to you, and then in turn it has this sort of that transformation, then extending that outward.
Yeah, and none of this is really unique to intentional community per se.
Right.
You're familiar with this. It's just human relationships, right?
Right.
In church community or whatever kind of community you have.
Yeah.
But it's just, I think, so the difference is it's just a little bit more, because we're
and you never know when it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
You're sharing more space, so it could happen. You think you're just bringing your dishes down, and then somebody catches you and brings up some conflict or and then it just
the keys.
Yeah, you jammed me today, the keys weren't there, and then you have to so it's just it's just more often, I guess, or more concentrated. It's all the dials are turned up a little bit. As I describe it, I'm why? I'm making it sound terrible. And in a way, it kind of is, but it's also incredible, and I love it.
No, I love that because you're right. I the dial being turned up on it is what's so great about that. Because when I'm imagining being in the car and listening to a song, and have that song kind of on a lower volume, and I'm I feel like I like this song, and so you turn it up, and you get to engage it a little bit more. And I'm a singer, so I'm going to be blasting that song and singing full volume along with it once I get into it. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's such a great image. So I love this. I love this topic of conflict. And Debbie, you were talking about just the ways to engage conflict and seeing conflict as such a positive thing and a way to get to know people and become intimate with people. we all have church stuff in common with one another, and I think about this in the context of church, and the community that we build at church, and I have to wonder, what are some of the, like, maybe I'm gonna take a step back from that before I ask that question. I'm gonna say, is there a role in community living, whether it's Jesus People or regular life or church, is there a role for things like a code of conduct or a creed or a belief statement or a protocol or a guideline that sort of helps to, helps to guide or shape the way conflict is managed? And I guess the prior knowledge that this question comes from is, like, I think of the early church. I think of the early church and the role that creed, canon, and episcopacy played in informing and shaping the way the church handled conflict. And I bring that all the way to today, and I think of my own church, and we have a behavioral covenant that we live by that tells us, especially when we disagree, this is how we're going to, and we're all signing this, as a commitment to, this is how, in this house, this is how we deal with these things. So, talk a little bit about that, whether or not such a thing is needed, is necessary. If so, what role does that play?
Yeah. I think, we're kind of like guideline light.
Sure.
Our beginnings of our community is like out of the Jesus People movement. So we got to kind of have this like hippie DNA.
Love it.
And so, which is great. And I feel like, there's parts of that are like, that movement came out of looking at what was going on in the world and embracing the things that were like colorful and music and all, the art, and then bringing Jesus, in the midst of that kind of cultural moment. And so I'm always looking at that, and I like that part of the hippie DNA. But the other part of like kind of rules or guidelines, like we're not great at. We have them, and we go over them with folks who are joining our community, but they're sort of
there's the base. There's like
suggestion.
There's the common sense stuff. That's like basic, like keep everybody safe. Like make sure there's like that stuff that any organization today would have.
Sure.
But then in terms of like this like more like common language, or this is how we do conflict, this is how we do this and that, like, or these are the rules.
Sure. Anything.
There's not a lot on paper. And it has been more of like a, and maybe if, I don't know, sometimes I wonder if Jesus People would have put more stuff on paper and ratified like a constitution and like, this is who we are, this is what we believe about this and this and this is our theology on this, and this is how we're going to do this as a church, that we might not have made it this far. Like it gave us some kind of like agility or like a nimbleness to like adapt and like be more like
welcoming.
And just like I don't know, be more reflective of who we are, because who we are now, like as in a group of 180 people, was a different thing than who we were 10 years ago when we were a different number of different people, and so I think it has allowed us to evolve in ways, but then there's cons to that too.
And I really love the idea of having some sort of I think they've tried different models like at different businesses for conflict management or what conflict resolution. And it would be interesting if we did like sort of adopt like a specific way to deal with conflict. I wonder if it would be, Teel's really great at getting people together. He got a friend and I together we were having a conflict and sat down with the both of us, and it was just great.
So much of it is just being willing to have the conversation. And I feel like I'm learning a lot, just like, I feel like in some ways we've learned just by doing.
Sure.
But I do now, and I never thought I would say this, but I'm like, oh, I think I might need to go back to school. Like I don't really want to go back to school, but I feel like I can see myself taking a class now. And like I've been since we graduated, I was like, I'm good.
Nope.
But like,
Yep.
but now I'm like, I have a very specific skill set that I'm using already, but I'm kind of making it up. And I would love some language and tools, and that's in conflict
Sure.
resolution and like nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
So, and some of us here have gotten have received training, and
Nice.
that's come in handy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think that we could use like more. I think we've kind of naturally picked up some of those tools along
Yeah.
the way, but I will say that right now my theory is that it's more important for a community to have a common language for how to do conflict than it is for a community to all agree on a theology about
Yes.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like as long as you have
Yes.
a common, like you all agree on this is how we're going to treat each other, then
Right.
everything else can kind of fall into place and you can figure it out from there.
Right.
But if because you've figured out how to disagree and how
Yeah.
to agree and how to do, but like if you don't have that, then that other stuff all of a sudden
Right.
gets real dicey.
Right. Oh my gosh. I
so,
feel
yeah.
like that's so relevant. That's so relevant.
Yeah.
And especially like, I mean, you look at the history of the church and the role that those, rules or guidelines or codes played, it didn't always pan out super well.
Yeah.
Like when it was based on here, this is what we all believe and it's these doctrine, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it had, so then it led to conflict not being handled well and
Yeah.
disagreements not being handled well and being forced to cause divisions and splitting. And,
Yeah.
there are times where maybe that kind of result is necessary.
Yeah.
And yet, how much could it have been avoided and how much could unity have been preserved? Like good, honest, authentic, vulnerable unity.
Yeah.
Had the code, said more about, this is how we will love each other
Yeah.
through disagreements
Yeah.
rather than, well,
This is what we agree
this
on.
is what we agree on,
Yeah.
and so when you don't agree, then you're dismissed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say that is going back to the kind of maybe the difference between what intentional community, whatever we're doing here, and not this.
Yeah.
Like a church, for example, like an average church. So here's a critique I have for kind of the church model is that if you're not living together and you're not sharing a lot and you're really just mostly sharing Sunday mornings,
Yeah.
and maybe some other activities through the week, then that puts a lot of pressure on your commonality needs to be in like it often by default falls to like what we believe together.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
the Sunday service is kind of formed around this is our teaching on this Bible scripture. This is how we worship and how we and so then there's a lot of pressure on like how we do this our faith and how we like our ethical like
Yeah.
and moral like rules that we've
Right.
gotten from the Bible. And so, but if you live together, then it kind of spreads that out over like, I don't know, for us, it just feels like it's more important that we treat each other well. And that you show up to your dishes shift. It's just like, I don't know what you believe about the Holy Spirit and this speaking in tongues, but can you just turn the keys back in and so I know where the car is when I get, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like it,
Yes.
and not that the other thing isn't important, but it just feels a little bit more grounded and spread out and not so much stress on the thing that bonds all of us is that we all believe this about the Bible and about whatever.
Yeah.
It's like, well, what about just like the rest of the days of the week, of just living life together? Like, what do we believe about that? Just like
Right.
how to raise our
Right.
kids and how to, treat one another and talk to one another, how to have conflict. And I think because we're living together, it kind of spreads all that out and grounds it a little bit in a different way.
Yeah. And do you think that maybe like if there was any like, statement of belief, if there was any, that it would be almost that it would be almost, do you believe in the inherent value of every human? Okay, great, then you're in, like, do you believe in that?
Yeah.
Because that's the
And
code
are you
that we
willing?
live by here.
Yeah. And are you willing to live by that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
because it's easy to say, but it's hard. There's days when, we share our building with low-income seniors, and we're right here in this neighborhood of Uptown, and, seeing the inherent value in every person that you encounter on some days is exhausting.
Right.
Yeah, it's a thousand decisions through your day.
Right.
Yeah, but I think we have more of those decisions because of where we're located, because of living together, and because it's not a group of people that chose each other, right? We're a group of people that over decades have kind of all been called to this one place, and we're from all over and have all sorts of different stories, and you never know who's going to come sit with you in the dining room, and so it's just always ready to be kind. Kind is to treat someone with
That they have inherent value.
yeah, that they're valuable.
Yeah.
And that's easy to say and really hard to do.
Yeah. I can imagine, like Teel, you said, like it's 1,000 decisions every day. And I can imagine that that's, exacerbated by this, concept of sharing, like having all things in common, as like the Acts 2 Fellowship of Believers would say it. I'd love to know a little bit more about resources and what that's like sharing. Like, does it feel like you truly have all things in common? Or is it a little bit more, specifically allocated, talk more about, sharing of resources.
Yeah, I think we've gotten less, like, it's funny because you say that you're going to do something different and you're not going to make it about the rules and make it about, like, and then you end up gravitating towards that in whatever you create. It's like, no, we're all about having all things in common. And so then that becomes the thing that you're like legalistic about, you know, like, like, no, all things in common. Like, you can't have private time, or you can't have, like, I don't know. So
that's not yours, that's ours.
But it's a balance. I think it's a pendulum swinging kind of, it seems like, hearing the history of Japuza. It feels like we've swung more in a direction of, the pendulum is currently swinging towards, like, let's, like, have good, like, boundaries and have our own spaces and our own, like, you know, it's okay to have your own TV and your own family time and your own this and that. And you really, there's not a lot of rules about, like, you can have your own dinner. Like, we have a kitchen team that makes, and Debbie's on it, and we're both on it, and we make dinner every night. But, like, if you're not into that meal and you want to cook your own food, you can. There's kitchens that you can do that in, and you don't actually have to share the cars. If you want to save up some money and pay for your own insurance and have your own car, you can do that. And so we all. But if you check no on all the things, like, if you don't share any of the things, then you're not really doing it anymore. But all of us check different boxes. I might be like, you know what, I can't do the car thing. I'm going to have I visit my family a lot. I'm just going to have my own car. But I'm going to eat in the dining room every night. And, that's a part that I do want to share. And I think we all have our own strategy. And on a good day, we're not judging each other for, like, I can't believe Debbie never eats in the dining room. Like, selfish.
I rarely do, actually.
I was going to say, I literally don't believe that Debbie never eats in the dining room. I really don't.
She doesn't as often.
I normally eat in our own apartment space with just my family. And I don't know why, really.
But y'all also keep your door open.
Oh yeah, people are always
all the
welcome.
time. People are always in your room, and that's not everybody. Not everybody keeps their door open all the time. So we all. It's a give and take and a push and pull, and I think. I think that we do pretty good at honoring everybody's strategy and maybe nudging, hey, like, haven't seen you in a while. Like, I don't know. It's a hard balance, as you can imagine.
And I can because I'm a pretty extroverted person and I'm married to a very introverted person. And so sometimes when I think about this concept of living in intentional community, I think about even just the community that we live intentionally in between the two of us. Like our partnership, like there's some strain there sometimes when it comes to like, but also I will say one of the beautiful things about that choice, and again, like, I'm comparing a very small 2-person community to a very large.
It's kind of the best comparison.
Yeah.
So,
because, I have been immensely transformed in that, like immensely. And I've learned so much just from the intentional community of living with my partner.
Yeah.
Learning about boundaries and the importance of them, like, and how much he values when I speak up for him in that, particularly when it comes to like the rest of my family who are all just like me. Like we are 5 extroverts all together and he is a like severe introvert in comparison. And so like when it comes to spending time with the Bakkens, it's like, he really needs me to stand in that gap and really speak up for him in that, because it can be really hard to get in a word edgewise when you're with my family. And so, I can imagine, what that's like in living in community on a macro level, like what you guys are doing, and the role that it must take to not only not only be aware enough of your own needs and the boundaries that you have, but then protecting those of other people as well. And knowing the, give and take that comes with saying, no, I really want you to have this, you have your own time. And then maybe later going, and now I'm going to draw you out a little bit too. Because we have that in our marriage too. That is something learned over time. There is like no crash course on that at all.
Nope.
Yeah. And it happens so gradually.
Right.
The learning, I was just looking at a list of our clean team.
Yeah.
We have 5 different chore teams that's the system that we use to keep the house clean. And I'm a team clean leader for our team. And I was just looking at our list today because we've been making some changes. And I just was thinking like, wow, because when I started leading the team like 4 years ago or whenever it was overwhelming because I was still relatively new to the community and I don't know how everybody functions. Like if I have to ask this person to change jobs, like how are they going to take that, this and that? Like does this person, and I learned that like somebody was offended that I even asked them to do pots, and pans. So like I've never done pots and pans. Like, okay, I didn't know that. And just like, but now I was looking at it today and I was like, I know everybody on this list so well, and I know exactly, like, I could call any of them and ask them to switch, and I had to do that this last couple of weeks because we're opening things back up, and I was just like, what? And it just happened little by little over 4 or 5 years of like, oh, I know all these people now, and obviously I'll keep, if there's another 5 years, I'll know even more about them, but I was just like, wow, like a lot has happened in 4 or 5 years. I've learned I've learned people's stuff, like their quirks and their like how to take care of people and like their communication styles. And so, just like what you're describing with you and your partner is like, it's a lot. And it is, that's the best comparison. So imagine that your family lived with you and Zach in a big apartment building, and then add some more friends to that, and you just start to you start to advocate for like, hey, well, take it easy on them because they had a rough life, they have some issues with this, and that probably led them to think when you said that. And you advocate for each other because you know each other's stories, and you might know somebody's story better than this person does, and so you. And this person might really annoy you, but somebody else, they really understand how to speak to them, and you kind of help each other. It's so it's just a more complicated web than like a single family unit.
Right. I love it though. I love it.
And I think too, the sharing, some of what Teel is saying has to do a little bit with privilege too. Some folks come and they don't maybe have as many options, or they've come because they're sort of at a space where they just need a place where they don't have to worry about owning things or, maybe we even give folks a little less work to do because they're going through recovery or grief or whatever it is. And so there is that space too of like, if you don't have things, we can make sure that you have everything you need, right? Yeah. So that's the other side of it. Like, yeah, I mean, we have a big TV and we have laptops and phones and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, when I first came as a 20-something, I didn't have a lot of stuff, and there was always everything I needed, right? So there is that sense of just being provided for, or like when young people come and, some places that are similar to this, like ministries or whatever, it costs a lot of money to go, just to go there, like whatever. And it's just, yeah, you can just kind of come and we'll feed you and we'll house you. And yeah, so there's that sense of provision, even if you don't have the privilege to maybe have your own everything, whatever.
And I speak from a place of privilege in that, but arguably, like, the more you have, there's a correlation with how, like, that you're having less community.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if you have your own big TV, then you're less likely to go use the TV in the living room, and then in the living room, you're more likely to run into other people and maybe, hey, you want to watch this movie too? Or like, and I don't know. Or if you have your own car, again, the less you share, the more the less community you're going to experience, and the less the volume's lower on that song that you like. And so it's as somebody who has more resources, like maybe like I have to like keep that in check more, and I have to think about that more. It's like, okay, Teel, you could buy your own whatever, but then is that really, how does that work with your strategy of the boxes you're checking that you've said that you want to share? Does that work into the plan, or are you kind of like, are you just choosing the romantic comedy again when you could watch a more
Teel and the rom-com?
You could watch a more serious, rewarding movie. Yeah.
And I remember as a kid, like this was like an idea planted in my head. We lived in Texas, and I can't remember, anyway, we'd moved into a new place, and my parents were like, well, why should we own a lawnmower? Like, let's just talk to the neighbor and see if we could share a lawnmower. And it's like, oh yeah, I mean, how often are you gonna use that thing? Like, let's buy it together, right? And so we bought a lawnmower together with our next door neighbor, right? But like, people they don't do those kinds of things. It was such a small thing, but it did plant the seed in my mind of like, oh, everybody doesn't need to have everything. Right? Like, but it's
a risk, because what if you go talk to your neighbor, but then they turn out to be kind of a jerk, and then you're sharing this lawnmower.
Or it breaks, then who repairs it? Or, you used it and now it's out of gas, and
turns into a conflict.
Well, it could, right? But it also is an opportunity to like interact more, because how often do you? We didn't interact with those neighbors. We were in different life stages and whatever, so it was kind of gave us an excuse to do that too. So I don't know.
I feel like that's a great story to illustrate the kind of sharing that you're talking about, because it's not a paternalistic, I have this and I'm sharing with you type of thing. It's these are the things that we have in common type of thing. Very cool. So I've been thinking, we kind of touched on this a little bit with the whole knowing other people's boundaries and wanting to advocate for each other. So I've been thinking a lot over the last few years, and for obvious reasons, especially over the last year and a half, about the role that like practicing solidarity plays in intentional living community. And I guess that, to me, that applies in the church, also in just the way I conduct my life as a white woman in the United States. Can you tell me about some ways that you've seen that practice or demonstrated that practice? I mean, I'm leaving it kind of open-ended for you guys to share a little bit about how that works in intentional community. How valuable is that, and how do you see it
It's a really good
playing
question.
out?
It's a really good question.
I think for me, being in this neighborhood and the changes that have happened over the 20 plus years that I've been here, and being able to, this idea of like recognizing the dignity of humans has really played out in the ways that we've interacted in our neighborhood. There's been different fights for the rights of, we have some folks that have lived under the viaduct in tents, and other situations where people were sort of being priced out, or different parts of the neighborhood where there was some conflict over whose voices should be amplified. And so I feel like for me, living in community gives me this place of knowing what it feels like to be valued and to be like recognized, and for my, this idea of like all the humans I encounter need the same, I don't know, just a support system and the right to live and to exist. And so for me, that's really motivated me to be involved in some neighborhood organizations and politics that I'm going to continue to be involved in. And
So when you talk about neighborhood, you're talking about Uptown,
Yeah.
right? Not just the, neighborhood of Jesus people.
Right. But I feel like the way that I live in community kind of gives me this space. Like I have more space I have more margin because of the way we live. And I also have more of a compassion for just, this idea that everyone I see really, I just want to recognize that dignity. I want to like, bring it to the forefront. I want other people to see people's value. But I think those are values that have really been reinforced by the way that I've been living. So.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's quite the same, but.
Yeah. No, I think it seems to me, again, as a newer guy, I've been here for like 5 or 6 years, but that the history of Jesus people has always been some level of like paying attention to what's happening in the neighborhood and trying to just be in solidarity in some way or another. But I would say since I've been here, there's been, in addition to that, more of an inward like look at how do we look at ourselves and like dig into our into our own whiteness, or predominantly white community. And I would say probably most predominantly white communities that are in cities through the 70s, 80s, 90s to now, some bumbling along the way of like recognizing like how does your whiteness impact your neighborhood, and how does your whiteness impact people of color in your community, in Jesus people, and like an assimilation that you thought was diversity, and just like I think we're having a lot of like, whoa, like wait, like in the last 5 years I've watched that, but that stems from individuals having those kind of looking inward from the leadership down, and everybody just like. It's not again, anytime we talk about Jesus people, it's just a bunch of individuals, right?
Yeah.
So like we're all over the map, but I would say that there's been a lot of people being willing to look inwards more, and talk about, white privilege and white supremacy and white fragility, and and because a lot of us are looking at that as individuals, then it does start to feel more like corporately we're putting that on our radar and digging into that, and it's been really important and really hard, but it does feel hopeful that just the fact that there's people that are willing to dive into that. And so I would say that's where we're at right now. It's very much in progress. But of course, there's outward ways that we can, we do a vigil on Sundays for the Black lives taken by police in the country, and it's a public way of showing solidarity, of holding people's names. But that only means something if you're also doing the inner work, like everybody's doing the work they need to do, and we can't force that. Like we can't be like, okay, now it's a new, again, we're not a rules oriented, okay, everybody at Jesus People now needs to
everyone's reading Wide Awake.
Right, everybody has to read it, but we do but there's been a lot more things offered, hey, this feels important, and everybody's invited to be a part of this book study, this group that we're doing, and this is why we're looking at this, and giving everybody the agency to lean into that, and it's encouraging that people are, and and I would say so. Work in progress. It's never going to be finished, obviously, but but it is encouraging that that's something that's on our radar, and and we have to keep paying attention to how we navigate that and how we can stand up for our neighbors and for the people in our community and have that solidarity. I think constantly learning how we can do better. There's a lot going on in Chicago right now and in the world, so it's a lot of opportunities to step up, and I hope that we keep getting better at knowing how to do that well, but still bumbling. That's the best word I can use, just kind of trying to figure this out and making lots of mistakes and being willing to make the mistakes and learn. I don't know.
Again, I'm such a visual person, so what I see, with the word bumbling, I'm picturing learning a dance and you're especially if it's not choreographed, but it's just
it's awkward.
This is a foxtrot, and someone hits play on the music, and you're okay. So I have
I feel it.
I have this I'm this is the rhythm, this is the meter, this is the the pace or whatever, the tempo, and then you have these set of steps that you can do, but they're not prescribed exactly how you put those in over the course of a song, and so it's just kind of it's meant to happen sort of organically, but there's going to be a lot of bumping into your partner, or stepping on toes, or bumping into other couples on the dance floor, or if someone's going to cut in, how do you coordinate that? I mean, that kind of dance.
And using that metaphor, if we're all in here and we're having a dance kind of party or learning how to do the foxtrot, is that an actual dance?
That is an actual dance.
Okay.
An actual dance.
Maybe after we can, then it's okay if we can invite the whole community, and some people might just stand on the wall.
Right.
They might not be ready, and we're not going to force everybody to come in and dance.
Right.
But if we're trying to learn how to dance, and you're just gonna walk through and kind of get in the way, or maybe hurt somebody, by walking through, or just you guys might be having foxtrot, but I'm wheeling my equipment through on this cart, and I'm gonna so using that metaphor, it's you can stand. We're not gonna force you to take part in the dance, but your actions, if your actions hurt, or your beliefs or whatever, do end up hurting somebody or oppressing someone, or then. So there is a certain amount of, it's not that. Solidarity can't be passive, completely, right?
Right.
You can. So it's this funny balance of giving everybody agency to go at their own pace in this journey of trying to treat each other well and have solidarity. But there are push comes to shove moments, and I don't know. So it gets complicated.
Complicated.
And so I don't know. We're in it.
Well, and I mean, you're in it, and I know that in your church, and in most churches, there are different degrees of willingness to engage these topics, right? And so just imagine your congregation all living together now, right? So the things that maybe might come up on a Sunday, could maybe be skirted around, but living together, they're probably going to come up. And it might be in some unexpected way, right? And so, which just brings us back to conflict and cost and all those things again. It's it's interesting just to watch the different ways that people interact with, especially this moment in history of where there's some really great materials that we've gotten from ECC and engaged in, and it's been really, we've had some great discussions. We had to do them on Zoom, even though we're, in the same building, we still were doing all the isolating during especially during the beginning of the pandemic. And just we're doing the work, but it's a lot.
There's still a lot to
so much
dig up,
Yeah, more to do. So
Yeah. It's a good question. Thanks for asking.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I feel like there's a piece of solidarity that you can't do unless you're willing to be a part of some version of intentional community. That I guess to maybe to use the dance metaphor again, like you can't say you're doing it if you're not even in the hall where the other people are, you know what I mean? You can't say I went to the dance when you actually hung out in the parking lot the whole time by yourself. But you were there, also you weren't. So I guess I see this incredible value. Yes, there's conflict, yes, there's cost, but I see this incredible value in learning how to practice solidarity in a variety of ways, right? There is the, black and white issue that we're facing 100%, but, when it comes to even things like mental health and preserving mental health, there is a solidarity piece to that too that says I may not be feeling what you're feeling. I don't have your same brain and I don't have your same experience, but I can be with you in this. And I feel like there's just an incredible opportunity to engage that and to learn and grow in that in intentional community. So bringing it back to the church piece again, how can you really say that you're practicing it? How can you really say that you're practicing solidarity, that you're really in it, that you're doing the work, if you're not willing to engage the relationships that are a part of that work, right?
Right.
So I was just curious about how that manifests.
The two things feed into each other.
Yeah.
If you don't have, because you can exist in intentional community and still, again, if you check no on enough of the boxes of sharing things, then you're not in the room.
Sure.
Too much. And you can still be loved and valued, but you're missing out on most of the thing.
Yeah.
And so that just being in intentional community doesn't guarantee that you're gonna have those relationships. You still have to work for it or put stuff into it. But assuming that you are putting that effort in at some level and you have relationships, when stuff comes up like a racial conflict or a mental health issue, when those things become a part of it, you tend to have to, you care about this person, so you have a vested interest in them, and you trust their narrative. You're more likely to trust their narrative and their experience. And if you don't have the relationship, then it's going to be complicated, right? It's going to be hard to get there, and it gets wonky. So we have to hope that those relationships are there, that's again, that we have this thing, this core of we've agreed that this is how we're going to treat each other. And then from there, whatever these conflicts are we have a lot better shot at these really complicated issues if we have this. So definitely the relationships and that relational capital is important. The mental health thing is another good example of I would say, because we live together and we need each other to be well, because if I'm unwell on a mental health level, like that's going to bleed over into Debbie's life and affect her life because I'm her clean team leader for one example. And if my mental health is taking away from my ability to organize the clean team or stay on it, things are really going to get disorganized. It's going to be stressful. And that's like, so no matter what, it's going to bleed into like, you know, into other people's lives because we have all these shared margins and connections. And so we have a vested I mean, Debbie wants me to be well, but it also like, so anyways, we have a vested interest in everybody having, you know.
But even in that, like if Teel was having, you know, a particularly difficult moment and needed to just maybe focus on being well mentally or physically or whatever, we can kind of allow for that for each other as well. Like, I mean, there's just times when you're in the parking lot. I mean, go back to the dance hall. You're in the parking lot or you're on the edge of the scene because you really you can't engage at that moment. And I think we really try to allow for those moments too, because maybe you just need to really do some intensive therapy for a couple months, or maybe you really do need to take some time off to grieve or to, you know, get well or whatever it is. So the way that we live, it bleeds into each other's lives in a way that could be kind of a domino effect, but also can be sort of a safety net, because it's like, hey, seems like you're, you know, not managing this team well. Are you okay? Is everything okay? Do you need a break? And I think
we're more likely to notice.
Yeah, because you can only hide for so long, and then it's like, probably. And maybe sometimes we just say, oh, you probably do need to take a break from that, you know, responsibility or whatever. So.
Right.
Less likely maybe to offer like a platitude.
No, right.
And more likely to like, let's get down to a practical solution because I need the dishes to get, like we need, you know, like, and not that it's just that. You care about the person, but it's like, let's be practical because our lives are very practical. So it's like, do you know, like, have you ever had therapy before? It's like, well, I did, but then I lost I had changed insurance, and then this, and it's like, oh, well, we can help you.
Yeah,
like with that, or like, let's figure it out, you know, or whatever it is. So I think that's real. Where I think if you just kind of share Sunday mornings and you don't have much of a relationship with somebody else, and you see that they don't seem to be doing well, it's kind of awkward to ask somebody you just see at church, like, hey, have you thought about therapy? Seems like you're kind of grumpy. It's like you gotta have some depth of relationship to like know enough about somebody to be like, hey, like, how you doing? Like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from weeks, years of just all those thousands of decisions and being together and doing the foxtrot together. You know, like
we're gonna have dance lessons.
We gotta do that foxtrot.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, so much good and rich stuff in here, because I think like I love the metaphor that we've been developing of this dance, because sometimes like when everybody's in and they're all dancing, like it can get a little intense. Like the temperature goes up because you've got people, you know, all dancing up together, and so sometimes you need to take a break and you need that fresh air. You need to just kind of, you know what I mean? But also like, there was another good point about, the opportunities that you have when you're living in intentional community to see each other and to have those opportunities where you're going to notice. Like if my relationship with people is relegated just to Sundays, I might see them being grumpy, but that could have so many different reasons. Right. There could be so many different reasons for that. And if my interaction with them is relegated just to Sundays, I'm not going to have, you know, there may be one moment where I can catch that person. And otherwise I have to wait until the next week. Like I have to wait until the next week to check in on them.
They might have a whole nother problem by then.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be forgotten. It'll be, you know, so many different things happen in a week. You know, happen in a day, much less a week. And I'm a person on staff at my church, and so I have a whole agenda. You know, like I've got a whole agenda on Sunday that usually as unfortunate as it sounds, like it doesn't usually involve, have I really seen every single person in my congregation,
Yeah.
Right.
like when it's my job, right?
Yeah.
So just thinking about how much life goes on in between those
The
times.
opportunities for we
Yeah.
hear stories all the time of I feel like I hear them of I did this and I felt bad about it and I didn't say anything, and then you just told a story recently about that, and then wouldn't you know it, that night I went down to just do a random load of laundry, unexpected, and they were doing laundry at 11 p.m. too. And I was able to apologize or whatever it was, or ask them about the
Surprisingly,
thing.
we don't do laundry together
You don't?
as a church community.
Maybe you should just do that. Intentional laundry.
Us and our neighbors who live downstairs,
Yeah.
we do laundry together.
Right.
There's very little conflict between us and our neighbors, but that would be the only opportunity that I have to experience what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You share the Lent, in the filter.
We do,
You're
yeah.
I see you had something red in your pocket this week.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another
Exactly.
receipt.
Oh yeah. Oh, loose change.
Yeah.
Score. Actually, Zach just found one of our neighbors. They have a daughter. We found one of her socks in our laundry recently.
A little tiny excuse for community.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
So returning the sock. It was a whole moment.
It's great.
Oh man. Yeah, such good rich stuff there. I'm trying to imagine now what it would be like to do laundry with some other folks in my church and what kinds of conversations that would lead to.
Yeah, and I started with this, and I want to come back to it of to get off my high horse or whatever, right? That I'm painting in broad strokes that
Sure.
and if you're just in a church that only meets on Sundays,
Yeah.
and I know that for instance that's not your church. You are
Right.
seeing each other. There's all kinds of stuff going on.
Yeah.
But it's a helpful way to describe to talk about this. But there's all kinds of in between shades of
Sure.
if you're a church that really is prioritizing relationships, then you're doing all kinds of stuff together, and and there's somebody whose job it is to call that family.
That's true.
That seems like they're not doing well, and
Yeah.
you're putting all kinds of intentionality into it.
Yeah.
So I that's why I hesitate to be intentional community is this.
Sure.
And what y'all
Sure.
are doing is
Something
you people.
else.
I don't know. It's just because I know it's not that.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
we're not that good at it.
Right. We're just,
What you're imagining
Yeah.
would be like to do laundry with that's how
That
we do
is-
it.
That's how it is.
That is
That's
how
how
it is.
Yeah.
We're
Awkward.
awkward and a lot of failing and bumbling and
Yeah.
Yep.
apologizing and just I don't know. So I just want to bring that back around that
Sure.
it's not about that. It's just
No.
a different structure, a different way to let's try it this way.
Yeah.
And let's turn the volume up on these things.
Right.
And there's pros and cons to it. But
Right.
it's interesting. It's an interesting life.
Yeah. I'm sure. And we do get, somewhat of a taste of that being a part of a church because there is somewhat of there is an intention to that, right? I mean,
Yes.
or you hope there is at least,
Yeah.
when you're building church community, it exists for a similar purpose of
Yeah.
we know that there's need for togetherness.
Yeah.
Togetherness is needed, and we do that on Sundays for worship, but there's things like small groups, and there's things like meals ministry and those kinds
Yeah.
of things that bring people together as well, and it's all predicated on that need for togetherness, that
Yeah.
need for connection, and that need to be together. The intentional piece, like you said, there's varying shades of that, and all of that it's all by choice. What level are you willing to engage this with? But I think, what I'm taking away from our conversation right now is the need to choose some shade.
Yeah. Yeah.
The need to choose some
to get
shade
it somewhere.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you got to hope if you're in a church that really is mostly just kind of Sunday mornings, and maybe you do a thing on Wednesday night, like a dinner together, and that's pretty standard. And maybe there's and there's some families that really they just do those two things.
Yeah.
Then that might be totally fine, but you just got to hope that those families, for their sake, have some other. Like maybe just in their
Right.
family, and maybe they live next door to their grandparents, and,
Yeah.
and they are really close to their neighbors, and they have a couple friends in the area and they really are
Yeah.
intentional with those people.
Yeah.
So you just got to hope that everybody is getting that connectivity somewhere,
Yeah.
and it doesn't have to look this way or that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But like, you do hope that I hope you're getting this
Right.
in some way, because it's
Yeah.
not good to be alone.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like we've all experienced on sort of a universal level in the
Yeah.
last year and a half in a pandemic,
Yeah.
the detriment of not choosing some level, like choosing
Right.
your level,
Yeah.
or what happens
Or
when
not being able to.
Yeah, like what happens when your choices are quite a bit more limited,
Yeah.
or
Right.
or you have no choices,
Yeah.
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 and that no freedom to choose, what level
Yeah.
you're engaging this in, because there's no opportunity. Just the
Yeah.
craziness of that. Man, like when are we gonna? I feel like we're all living through this kind of trauma, and there's some,
Yeah.
there's gonna be a day where we look back on this and be like, oh my gosh, remember when we were so alone?
Yeah.
Ugh, just how
Yeah,
sad
I
that
haven't processed what it did to me.
Right.
We're both pretty we're all very extroverted here.
Yeah.
And I never thought I would spend that much time on my couch. So I don't think I've fully, I don't know what that did to me. And at some point it might hit me all at once, and I'll just curl up or something in a ball, because I think I was just get through, but
Yeah.
Yeah, like we've talked about this, we've touched on mental health a little bit, and just now I'm thinking about trauma. Now
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, living through trauma together, or when people bring in trauma, from previous parts of their life before they, became a part of this intentional community. How do you care well for that?
Yeah, I mean, every person's so different, and the ways that people react to everything in their lives is so different too. So it's not I think that's the truth about almost everything we do. It's not a one size fits all.
Sure.
And hopefully we have enough things in place where
Yeah.
people have mentors and folks neighbors and people that are checking in on them.
yeah.
I mean, we do that to various degrees, and
But I'm always worried that we missed, that's
know,
is this
I know.
person okay, or is that person okay? Are we doing enough? Are we doing the same thing that you probably do in
Yeah.
your job
Oh my
at your
gosh,
church?
right?
Just
I mean,
are we doing
that's-
enough for the kids? Are we doing enough for the
Yeah.
elderly? Are we doing enough for the families, the single people, and it's just you just keep trying, and you, I don't know, and you fail, and
you fail.
Yeah.
apologize.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say we're figuring that out now, still in it.
Yeah, for sure.
We love Desi,
Yeah, that was great.
and it's great to share her with you all, because she's a good friend of ours, and I'm so glad that she was able to be with us. And we've got one more episode in this season left, and so we hope you will tune into that as well. As always, feel free to email us at intentionalcommunitypodcast@gmail.com.
Good job.
Totally nailed
That's
it.
us. Yeah, you got it.
All right. Thanks, y'all.